Welcome to Top Stories Hub. Today we've got a new story, a mystery you'll want to unravel. At the esteemed Harrington Conservatory, instructors habitually overlooked Eleanor Harper, their reserved new aide. When disaster hits at a crucial recital, they push her to tackle a daunting piano composition, unaware that the unassuming woman they've been undermining is one of the globe's most renowned pianists. The grand corridors of the Harrington Conservatory buzzed with a familiar orchestra of noises, pupils running through scales, teachers delivering sharp feedback, and the sporadic huff of exasperation. In the midst of this, Eleanor Harper glided unnoticed, tidying sheet music and polishing piano keys with skillful precision. At 38, she intentionally faded into the shadows, her chestnut hair tied in a neat braid, her plain blue dress understated, her actions efficient. 6 weeks into her role as an administrative aide, she was practically invisible to the faculty, which suited her perfectly. "Ms. Harper, sort these by composer, not by date." Dr. Victoria Langley's sharp tone sliced through the room like a maestro's cue, authoritative and exacting. The piano studies director barely lifted her eyes from her elegant leather planner. "Right away, Dr. Langley." "I'll get it sorted," Eleanor responded quietly, gathering the pile of sheet music from the professor's polished hands. With a brisk nod, Dr. Langley strode off down the hall, her heels tapping out a rhythmic beat on the marble floor. Eleanor observed her departure, a subtle grin flickering across her lips. While rearranging the scores, her gaze settled on a complex list transcription, stirring a faint twitch in her fingers as dormant instincts sparked at the sight of the well-known notes. It had been 5 years since her last performance, 5 years since. "Caught napping on the clock, Miss Harper." Professor Edward Hammond's voice jolted her from her thoughts. The aging composition instructor squinted at her through wire-framed glasses, his bow tie perpetually crooked. "Just sorting, Professor," Eleanor replied, swiftly arranging the papers correctly. "Humph. Once you're done, Madame Laurent needs assistance with tomorrow's scholarship event, something about program notes," he grumbled. "I'll head over immediately." Professor Hammond hovered, eyeing her as she deftly finished the task. "You know," he remarked, "for someone who says they've had no proper musical education, you handle those scores like you grasp their intricacy." Eleanor kept her gaze lowered. "I've learned a bit in my 6 weeks here." "Remarkable," he muttered, his voice tinged with doubt rather than praise. "But don't forget, Ms. Harper, truly grasping music demands more than knowing sheets and notes, it requires decades of rigor, skill, and refined upbringing." Eleanor gave a polite nod. "I wouldn't dare think otherwise, Professor." Seemingly content, Hammond shuffled away, grumbling about slipping standards and a time when staff knew their roles. That afternoon, Eleanor tapped lightly on the door of Madame Celeste Laurent, the conservatory's distinguished French performance coach. "Come in," rang out the commanding voice. Madame Laurent sat at her desk, glasses balanced on her nose, papers piled high around her. At 65, she exuded authority, her silver hair wound into a flawless chignon, her posture as poised as a dancer's. "Miss Harper, at last. These program notes are a mess, I need them retyped for tomorrow's scholarship contest. The donors demand flawlessness," she declared. "Of course, Madam," Eleanor said, taking the stack and noting the red-inked corrections scrawled across the pages. "And make sure there are no errors this time. We can't afford another fiasco like last week's recital programs," Madame Laurent added sternly. Eleanor swallowed a retort. The so-called fiasco was a lone misplaced accent in a French composer's name, a mistake Madame Laurent herself had made, though Eleanor would never say so. "I'll be thorough," she assured instead. As she turned to go, her eyes caught the score open on Madame's piano, Liszt's rendition of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, the same piece she'd studied earlier. "Is this what Benjamin Reed will perform tomorrow?" she blurted before she could stop herself. Madame Laurent's perfectly shaped brow arched. "Indeed. Why do you ask?" Eleanor paused, choosing her words with care. "It's a bold pick for a student. Mr. Reed is our facile, our most talented student. A demanding piece is exactly what he needs, Madame Laurent said, her eyes narrowing. But I doubt you're equipped to judge the complexity of a Liszt transcription, Miss Harper. You're correct. I overstepped, my apologies. The day of the scholarship competition dawned with a palpable buzz of excitement at the conservatory. Donors clad in tailored suits and adorned with pearls mingled with faculty in the opulent foyer, while students holed up in practice rooms, fine-tuning their performances. Eleanor arrived early, wearing her finest navy dress, her braid more meticulously styled than usual. The day's events would decide which young musicians would earn the prestigious Harrington Scholarship, a full-ride award that could kickstart their careers. Miss Harper, thank goodness you're here, Professor Hammond called out, beckoning her toward a group of board members. The programs, please. She handed over the freshly printed stack, still warm from the press. Perfect, he said, barely glancing at them before passing them to the eager donors. Now, head backstage, we need help. The students are in their usual pre-performance frenzy. Backstage was pure pandemonium. Young musicians paced nervously, silently rehearsed finger patterns, or sat with closed eyes, mentally running through their pieces. Benjamin Reed, the conservatory standout student, stood off to the side, his face ashen, hands quivering faintly. Mr. Reed, you okay? Eleanor asked, approaching him cautiously. The young man glanced up, barely registering her. I'm fine, he muttered, his voice unconvincing. You're tackling the list, right? I caught your practice yesterday, it was stunning, she said warmly. Benjamin blinked, finally focusing on her. You, heard me? Eleanor offered a kind smile. Hard not to when you play with that kind of passion. But those technical parts, he began, then shook his head. I'm not sure I can pull it off. Not today, with everyone watching. Eleanor felt a twinge of empathy, recalling her own battles with stage fright, the kind of pressure that felt like a physical weight. Can I see that? She asked, pointing to his score. He handed it over, puzzled, most staff barely understood basic notation. Eleanor turned to the section she'd heard him struggle with. You're hitting this part too hard, she said gently. Liszt demands strength, sure, but it's about finesse, not raw force. Picture it like waves rolling in, not a bolt of lightning. Benjamin gaped at her. How do you know that? Eleanor quickly returned the score, realizing her slip. Oh, just something I overheard Madame Laurent tell another student once. Before he could press further, Dr. Langley swept in, clipboard in hand. Everyone, to your places. Mr. Reed, you're up first. She flicked a dismissive hand at Eleanor. Miss Harper, keep the green room quiet, please. As Eleanor stepped back, she caught Benjamin murmuring to himself, waves, not lightning. Waves. From the green room, Eleanor tuned in as the scholarship competition kicked off. Dr. Langley's voice boomed over the speakers, greeting the esteemed guests and highlighting the significance of the occasion. The recital hall's pristine acoustics carried every note vividly to where Eleanor sat. Benjamin went first, delivering a steady, if not electrifying, performance. He followed Eleanor's tip on the tricky section, navigating it more fluidly than in rehearsal. The applause that followed was warm but not thunderous. One after another, the students took the stage, some shone brightly, while others buckled under the pressure. Eleanor listened intently, her seasoned ear picking up subtleties most would overlook. During a break, Madame Laurent burst into the green room, visibly frazzled. Miss Harper, take these drinks to the judges' table, she directed, pointing to a tray of water glasses. And keep a low profile. As Eleanor cautiously neared the judges' table, she overheard Dr. Langley whispering to Professor Hammond. Reed totally misread the list, too restrained in the allegro, too hesitant in the crescendos. I've told Celeste her methods are getting dated, Hammond replied, sipping his coffee. Today's students need clear guidance, not French musings about feeling the music. Eleanor set the glasses down quietly, but Professor Hammond spotted her. Well, look who's listening in, he said loudly, prompting Dr. Langley to glance up sharply. So, Miss Harper, what's your take on Mr. Reed's performance? The comment was meant to humiliate her, to remind her of her place, but something, maybe the music still echoing in her mind, maybe memories of her own mentors, pushed Eleanor to speak candidly. His technique was top-notch, but he hasn't quite tapped into the piece's soul. Liszt transcriptions aren't just about skill, they're about channeling the essence of both composers. A heavy silence followed. Dr. Langley's teacup stalled midair. Excuse me. Professor Hammond stammered. Eleanor flushed, lowering her eyes. I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn. That wasn't my place. Absolutely not, Dr. Langley snapped. Go back to your tasks, Miss Harper, and leave the critiques to those qualified. As Eleanor rushed back to the green room, she didn't notice the curious glance exchanged between the professors, a spark of doubt taking hold. The scholarship competition's final segment was about to start after a brief pause. The conservatory's recital hall was packed to the brim, with affluent donors, faculty, performers' families, and fellow students filling the graceful space. Crystal chandeliers bathed the crowd in a soft glow, and the polished wooden walls seemed to hum with expectation. But backstage, a crisis was brewing. What's that supposed to mean? He can't go on. Dr. Langley's voice, though quiet, cut like a razor, brimming with urgency. The Grayson Foundation folks came specifically to hear the Liszt piece. Benjamin Reed slumped on a bench, his head bowed low, breaths coming in uneven gasps. His right hand shook wildly. My fingers, they're numb, he choked out between shallow breaths. I can't feel them at all. Madame Laurent crouched beside him, her face etched with worry. It's likely a panic attack, she said softly. Even the most gifted artists face this sometimes. This is outrageous, Dr. Langley snapped under her breath. The Grayson funding depends on today's performances, and they insisted on a Liszt composition. Professor Hammond stalked back and forth in the cramped backstage space, his bow tie now hopelessly lopsided. Could another student jump in without rehearsal? No way, it's out of the question. The Liszt transcription is brutally tough, and none of the others have studied it. Eleanor lingered silently in the corner, her eyes tracing the unfolding drama. The score on the piano, Liszt's take on Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, seemed to whisper to her, pulling at her soul. It had been 5 years since she last played for an audience, 5 years of recovery and second-guessing. How about Peterson or Lee? Hammond threw out, his voice tinged with desperation. Peterson's already performed, and Lee plays the violin, Dr. Langley shot back, her tone biting. We're out of options. We'll have to scrap the final act. Madame Laurent's expression darkened. We'll need to announce a medical emergency, she said grimly. Dr. Langley's face drained of color. If we do that, the Grayson Foundation will pull their support. That's $2 million for scholarships, gone. While the professors bickered in tense, hushed tones, Eleanor felt herself drawn toward Benjamin's crumpled figure. She knelt beside him, across from Madame Laurent. Benjamin, she said gently, take a slow, deep breath. Hold it for 4 seconds, then let it out for 8. The young man struggled to follow her calm guidance, his breathing gradually steadying. That numbness? It's normal, she reassured him, her voice soft but firm. It'll fade, but you need a moment to recover. We don't have a moment, Dr. Langley cut in sharply. The show starts in 5 minutes. Actually, Eleanor said, standing up, her voice steady with a confidence she hadn't felt in years, I can step in and play. 3 stunned gazes snapped to her. Professor Hammond was the first to react, letting out a sharp laugh. That's ridiculous, Miss Harper. This isn't the time for pranks. I'm completely serious, Eleanor said, holding his stare. You're just an administrative aide, Dr. Langley said, her words deliberate, like she was speaking to a child. This piece is among the most demanding in the piano repertoire. I understand how challenging it is, Eleanor replied calmly. Madame Laurent's eyes searched Eleanor's face, a flicker of realization dawning. You told us you had no musical background. I never said that, actually, Eleanor said with a gentle correction. That was your assumption. The professors traded looks, torn between panic and disbelief. This is absurd, Dr. Langley declared. We can't send an untrained staff member to perform for the Grayson Foundation. The restless murmur of the audience drifted in from the recital hall, signaling the intermission had dragged on too long. What other option do we have? Madame Laurent asked, her French accent thickening with stress. It's either Miss Harper or admitting we've got no one. Professor Hammond shook his head fiercely. This is going to be a catastrophe. Dr. Langley shut her eyes for a moment, her face tight as she weighed the risks. When she opened them, her mind was made up. Fine, she said curtly. Miss Harper will perform. The piece lasts 14 minutes, it'll at least give us time to come up with an excuse for the donors. She fixed Eleanor with an icy stare. Do you even know the piece? Yes, Eleanor answered simply. This is utterly unorthodox, Professor Hammond protested, his voice rising. We have no idea what she's capable of. It seems we don't know much about her at all, Madame Laurent murmured, her gaze still locked on Eleanor with growing intrigue. Dr. Langley leaned in close, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. If you make a fool of this institution, you're out of a job on the spot. Is that clear? Eleanor gave a single nod, her pulse quickening, not from dread, but from a spark of excitement she hadn't felt in ages. As they hustled her toward the stage, Professor Hammond shoved the sheet music into her hands. At least glance at this while you're out there. Try to act like you know what you're doing. Eleanor took the pages with a faint smile. I appreciate it, but I won't need them. Before they could react to her startling confidence, the stage manager waved frantically. 30 seconds until we're live. Dr. Langley steadied herself with a deep breath, forced a polished smile, and stepped onto the stage to face the crowd. Esteemed guests, due to an unforeseen issue, Benjamin Reed cannot perform tonight. But we're lucky to have another pianist ready to deliver Liszt's rendition of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. While she spoke, Eleanor shut her eyes, softly stretching her fingers. After 5 grueling years of healing and uncertainty, Eleanor Harper, once celebrated worldwide as the extraordinary Eleanor Lang, was poised to reclaim her place at the keys. The audience's polite clapping as Eleanor walked on stage felt lukewarm at best. In the front row, Dr. Langley sat stiffly next to Professor Hammond, their forced grins failing to mask their unease. Madame Laurent, though, leaned in slightly, her eyes sharp with curiosity and anticipation. The grand piano shone brilliantly under the stage lights, its lid fully raised, exuding an almost sacred aura. Eleanor approached it with quiet reverence, adjusting the bench with the effortless precision of a seasoned performer, an act so routine yet so perfectly executed that it subtly sharpened the audience's focus. Settling at the piano, Eleanor paused to ground herself. 5 years of painstaking physical therapy, rebuilding the strength in her hands scarred by a devastating accident, had brought her to this unexpected moment. She hadn't anticipated this, hadn't imagined today would mark her return to performing before a crowd. Yet here she was, ready. Her hands met the keys. From the opening, powerful chords of Beethoven's timeless symphony, reimagined through Liszt's daring piano arrangement, it was obvious to everyone in the hall that something remarkable was unfolding. Eleanor's fingers danced with breathtaking accuracy, coaxing sounds from the instrument that felt almost superhuman. The iconic 4-note motif echoed through the space, carrying the grandeur of a full orchestra but with the tender intimacy only a solo piano could offer. The audience underwent a quiet metamorphosis. Their courteous attention shifted to stunned disbelief, then bloomed into captivated awe. Dr. Langley's rigid smile faltered, replaced by a look of wide-eyed astonishment. Professor Hammond leaned forward, his glasses slipping unnoticed down his nose. As Eleanor transitioned into the development section, her playing revealed not just flawless technique but a deep, soulful connection to the music. This wasn't just a precise execution of written notes, it was a living, breathing reimagining, channeled through the hands of someone who grasped both Beethoven's bold innovation and Liszt's pianistic brilliance. Madame Laurent was the first to show a reaction, a faint "mon Dieu" slipping from her lips as realization hit. She gripped Professor Hammond's arm, whispering fiercely, "It's Eleanor Lang." The name spread through the crowd in soft murmurs. Eleanor Lang, the wunderkind who had swept Europe by storm 15 years earlier, Eleanor Lang, whose career was shattered by a horrific accident, Eleanor Lang, who vanished from the spotlight 5 years ago after a failed comeback in Vienna. On stage, Eleanor was in her element, reconnecting with a part of herself she'd buried for years. Her hands, once weakened and frail, now moved with assured power, unleashing torrents of notes that filled the hall with radiant sound. The most demanding sections, the ones Benjamin had wrestled with, poured from her fingers as effortlessly as breath. Where the young student's performance had been technically solid but emotionally cautious, Eleanor's was infused with the insight of someone who tasted both soaring success and crushing loss. Dr. Langley's face was ghostly pale. Professor Hammond kept taking off and repositioning his glasses, as if hoping to alter the reality before him. Only Madame Laurent seemed to move past the initial shock, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. As she neared the final movements, Eleanor dared to glance up, meeting the eyes of the audience she'd avoided until now. Their faces weren't merely impressed, they were changed, utterly absorbed. Wealthy donors, critical professors, and ambitious students were bound together in the rare magic of witnessing true genius. With strength, finesse, and impeccable balance, Eleanor guided the piece to its close, the final chords ringing out with commanding authority. Then, a hush. For 3 heartbeats, the room stood still, caught in the wake of what they'd just experienced. Then the crowd exploded. The standing ovation hit like a tidal wave, loud and unrestrained. Those who had sat in polite reserve moments before were now on their feet, clapping with wild enthusiasm. Some dabbed at tears, others shouted, "Brava!" In the back, an elegant older patron wept openly. Eleanor lingered at the piano for a moment, her hands resting gently in her lap, eyes closed as she soaked in the wave of sound, not music now, but pure, heartfelt admiration. When she rose and offered a humble bow, the applause surged even louder. Dr. Langley remained rooted to her seat, her face still drained of color. Beside her, Professor Hammond had abandoned all pretense of composure, shaking his head in disbelief, his mouth slightly open. Only Madame Laurent joined the standing ovation, her eyes gleaming with emotion. As Eleanor took another bow, she caught sight of Benjamin Reed in the wings, his earlier panic replaced by awe at what he'd just seen. She gave him a warm, reassuring smile before turning back to the crowd. Dr. Langley finally stirred, rising abruptly and moving to the stage with stiff, mechanical steps. She grabbed the microphone and addressed the still clapping audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We owe you some clarity." She faced Eleanor, struggling to keep her poise. "Would you like to introduce yourself fully, Miss Harper? Or perhaps, Miss Lang?" A quiet fell over the crowd as Eleanor stepped forward. For years, she'd concealed her true identity, locking away her past. Now, bathed in the stage's warm glow, she felt a burden lifting. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm Eleanor Lang." The revelation sent a fresh wave of excitement through the audience. An older man in a tailored suit leaned toward his neighbor, his whisper carrying, "Lang, the finest Liszt interpreter of her generation." Dr. Langley's smile grew brittle. "Could you perhaps share with our audience why a world-famous pianist has been working as our administrative aide for the past 6 weeks?" The question was meant to trip her up, but Eleanor met it with calm assurance. 5 years ago, an injury left doctors convinced I'd never play again, she said, her voice steady and clear. "After countless surgeries and years of rehab, I wasn't sure if I could, or even wanted to, return to the stage. I needed to rediscover my connection to music, free from the spotlight's pressure." She glanced at the faculty, who listened with varying degrees of discomfort. The Harrington Conservatory's reputation for excellence pulled me here. I wanted to dive back into the world of music, to watch and learn before charting my next path. Madame Laurent stepped onto the stage, her graceful poise fully restored. "Why keep your identity a secret?" she asked, though her tone hinted she already knew the answer. "Would you have treated me the same if you'd known who I was?" Eleanor replied softly, her words carrying gentle weight. The question lingered, sharp and unanswerable. Dar. Langley had the decency to look uneasy, while Professor Hammond suddenly found his bow tie fascinating. A silver-haired man rose from the audience, his presence commanding. "Ms. Lang, I'm Charles Grayson. My foundation came to support emerging talent, but today, we've seen a remarkable comeback. Would you consider leading a master class for our scholarship students?" Before Eleanor could answer, Dr. Langley jumped in eagerly. The Harrington Conservatory would be thrilled to have Ms. Lang conduct a series of master classes, she declared, her voice now brimming with warmth. "In fact, we've been exploring an artist-in-residence role for her." Eleanor raised an eyebrow but stayed silent about the obvious fabrication. Mr. Grayson smiled broadly. "Wonderful. Then I believe we can boost our funding pledge. True talent deserves support, don't you think, Dr. Langley?" As they dove into details, Professor Hammond approached Eleanor, fidgeting with his glasses. "Miss Lang," he started, his earlier arrogance swapped for uneasy respect. "I owe you an apology for missing your incredible gift." "You never sought it out, Professor," Eleanor said kindly, without bitterness. "We often only notice what we're looking for." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable, then added, "I hope you'll consider staying in a role that suits your talents." As the faculty swarmed around her, suddenly keen to align themselves with the renowned Eleanor Lang, Benjamin Reed edged closer from the wings. Eleanor spotted him and stepped away from the eager professors. "That was. I've never heard anything like it," the young pianist said, his voice thick with admiration. "You will, in time," Eleanor reassured him, "with the right mentorship and practice." "Would you teach me?" he asked, his face lighting up with hope. "I'd be delighted," she said earnestly, "but only if you swear to play for yourself, not to impress them." She nodded toward the faculty and donors, now deep in lively discussion. In that moment, gazing at the young musician's sincere expression, Eleanor saw her future clearly, not a return to the solitary life of a touring star, but a new purpose here, guiding, teaching, and passing on the lessons her journey had taught her. A month later, Eleanor Lang settled into her new office at the Harrington Conservatory, a nameplate on the door proclaiming, "Artist in Residence," a role crafted just for her after her stunning return to the piano. Dr. Langley and Professor Hammond had become almost overly deferential, constantly seeking her input on department matters. Only Madame Laurent treated her with genuine ease, neither fawning nor dwelling on past oversights. While reviewing applications for her master class, Eleanor heard a knock. Benjamin Reed stepped in, clutching sheet music for his upcoming recital. "Professor Lang," he greeted with a grin, "I've been working on that passage like you advised." "Let's hear it," she said, pointing to the corner piano. As Benjamin played, Eleanor mused on how swiftly her life had transformed. Sometimes, the deepest truths emerge not from concealing who we are, but from finding the bravery to show it. If this story stirred something in you, keep in mind that looks can deceive, and real talent often lurks in the shadows. Have you ever been underestimated or realized someone had depths you never suspected? Drop your stories in the comments below. Love this tale of hidden brilliance and redemption? Be sure to subscribe to our channel for more uplifting stories that urge us to see beyond the surface and treat everyone with respect and dignity. Until next time, remember, the most remarkable people often seem the most ordinary at first glance. That's all for today's tale on Top Stories Hub. Hit subscribe, leave a comment, and tell me what you'd like to see next.